Civilized society.
We are starting this podcast again because the last podcast, the last episode that we tried to cover from Escape from Freedom, we got halfway through and we got really into the reeds about escape from freedom, okay? So that's people trying to assuage the anxiety of freedom, which is who will you be? What will you do? What will you believe? All of these things are extremely anxiety inducing because they are about your entire life. I mean, they're massive decisions.
I'm sorry, but you said we got really into the reeds instead of the weeds.
The reeds is real. It's a thing.
What the fuck are the reeds? Are you in the fucking Moses? Yeah, but no one says we got into the reeds. That's not the phrase.
Do.
See, okay, we've already started off on a bad foot again. But let's just roll it. Fuck this, man.
Rolling because I'm right. Okay, the Patreon.
No one says we got into the. No one says we got into the reeds. It's we got into the weeds. WEEDS.
See, that's wrong though, because you don't say I got into the weeds. Weeds is not plural. No, I'm thinking about pot.
Yeah, it is plural. You drug addict.
Whatever. Leave me alone. This is beyond the point. See, that's what you do. You like to nitpick. People are watching this podcast fall apart in real time. Like they're gonna watch as each episode as we just slowly devolve into like attacking each other. Like, that's not English, you idiot. Anyway.
I didn't say you were an idiot. I just said.
You impolited. You called me a drug addict, okay? I think, I'd rather be a drug addict than an idiot. Because it's fine.
True.
You can be a drug addict and smart. Maybe. Mm-hmm. Okay, look. So we went into the weeds. We went into the reeds. We went into weed. Wherever we went, it was chaotic. And the problem was some of us get angsty, don't we?
Yeah, I think that that is something that happens to me. I've said many times before that I don't do video confessions. I don't talk about, my inner life on the podcast, because
outer life.
I don't talk about my outer life either.
People don't say inner life. That's not real. That's not how it goes.
What?
It's
everyone has an inner life.
What the fuck is an inner life? An inner life? Then what's your outer life? That's fake, okay? Stop with your fake words and your fake language. Let's talk about some fake freedom, okay? That's what I like. I love this book, man. I love this book because I love freedom. USA. USA. But the thing is that, like, truly, I think it sucks because I never really understood what freedom was until I started to see everybody be like, please censor me. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I took for granted that we were just all free as a kind of a technical state of existence. But it's not that. There's an inner life of freedom too. And so that's what this book goes into, which is like kind of the more philosophical, psychological idea of freedom, which is vastly more interesting and vastly more important to outer freedom, which is the freedom from, like the freedom from your government, freedom from harassment, tyranny, all of that. Freedom of speech is freedom from. It's freedom from being forced into not speaking or whatever. But then there's freedom too, which could be characterized as, well, what will you say? What will you do with the freedom of speech, So we're going to go into this next part of the book. Now that we're refreshed, now that we're a little more relaxed and caffeinated and nicotined up or whatever it is that you need to be over there to function. Because freedom two is the answer to when you see people, defending censorship. It's really like, it feels like I live in the upside down world. People asking, Facebook, please save me from information I don't like. What the fuck? Please censor this and people shouldn't be allowed to say this and if you have an opinion that's offensive, well, you should be able to lose your job. Like, this is truly people that have given up their their freedom and instead are replacing it with systems that force you into certain ways of being. And it's a really sad thing. Realistically, we should be sad for it because part of it makes me angry because it's like, don't be a loser. But then the other part of me is like, wow, man, you got to understand how deeply divorced from your freedom as a human being to choose and to define yourself and your life you are to want to enact systems that force that upon you and others. So let's go into freedom 2, how it is that we get out of that kind of cultural situation. That the fear with that is that the more people run from freedom, the more they run toward authoritarianism. And that's what this book makes a claim, is that, yeah, we can look at fascism and communist dictatorships and all of that as these systems that were enforced upon the people, but it's never like that. It's always that the situation was ripe for it. There was something in the situation, whether it was the people were trying to escape something worse that they felt was, well, this will be the answer to that, or there was some type of situational instability. Like Nazi Germany was a perfect example of that. There was all these different situational factors that made people so desperate for the sense of security that comes from a system that tells you what will be done and what you have to do. And that's what has to be understood when you understand freedom, is that freedom is inherently, it's the antithesis of security in some ways. And yeah, you have to pursue freedom too, to create that security for yourself. Because if not, you just live in a sense of insecurity. And that's ripe for problems.
These abstractions tire me. What I'm curious about, since I did not read the book, and I'm relying upon you to tell me, is, okay, I understand the concept, and I think the viewers will have understood if they've possibly made it this far into the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
After our long discussion of Lutheranism and Calvinism, and then this, But if they've made it this far, I think I understand the basic idea of freedom from, and now freedom to. But how does this guy Fromm, how does he
just pick
I don't
one.
know his
Just
name. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Fromm.
Okay, great.
I don't like
That's the one
Fromm
that I
because then it's Erich
Fromm
Fromm,
by
freedom from.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, I don't like that.
Do it. Okay, then say the other one then.
Fromma. How does he tell you, okay, here's how to get your freedom to going?
Okay.
How are you doing it? How are you practicing freedom to?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, the thing is that he puts out these, like this list of qualities that you have to pursue in order to create that secure sense of freedom for yourself. So freedom 2 is the other side of the coin of freedom. So, it's like you have the concept of freedom, and then it's like two halves. There's freedom from, okay, which you can't have freedom 2 without that. But then there's freedom 2. Now, this is the really hard thing to explain because it's these words, right? It's values. So it's unity or identity, creation, and accomplishment. These are some of the terms that he uses to describe what freedom 2 is or looks like. And so, I mean, how do you even explain that? It's so easy for us to say, here's everything that's wrong. Let's talk about everything that's wrong. And this is like, it's kind of a tiring thing also, because this is the entire cultural discourse, which it's partially just human bias to focus on what's wrong, right? But I get tired of it because it's like, well, what do we do? Like, I get it. I get that things are wrong. But, one of the things that's interesting to me is that anytime we go into, well, here's what we need to do, or here's what works. This is an interesting thing, is that I've noticed that if you talk about what's working, like what's good in a society or what's good in some type of otherwise situation with problems, there is a class of people that immediately attack that. And I always get some pushback anytime I express some kind of like, well, they are really good things in our society, like all the freedom from that we have, right? Freedom of speech, freedom to express yourself online, fucking electricity. Like there's all these things, secure water, all these different things that they could be way worse. But there's always someone that's like, well, I mean, are we ignoring the things that are bad? It's like, how? Since when are we ever ignoring the things that are bad, first of all? But I think this is the hard part for humans, is to get to the part of the positive, and that's part of this idea, right? Freedom too is creation. It's not destruction. So it's an important distinction here, because especially when a lot of the cultural discussion is like, let's deconstruct. Let's get rid of this institution. Let's break this down. Well, what are you going to make? And usually when you push on that and you say, okay, like for instance, the abolish the police one is a good example. There's like, okay, abolish the police, deconstruct it, break it down, get rid of it. Okay, well, what comes next? We're gonna have community militias. Like, what? That's called a gang, okay? Like that's a very weak answer for what comes after the destruction. And see, that's where we fail so much. We fail on freedom too. It's so easy for us to say, well, this is what's wrong and let's break this down. But how do we get to the part that we build the good thing? It remains this utopia. So this is the part that is difficult to explain. So I guess there's these values, right? And I think the way that, personally, what I think it is that the individual has to cultivate these values in themselves first. Okay, I can't go out into society and, try to get people to have real identities that are not based on some group affiliation or some, ideology or something, if I haven't done that for myself. So there's this element which is something that I love in this book, and something that recurs in a lot of the different books I read, that the answer is with the individual. And people scoff at this, right? Like, oh, yeah, well, don't bother with the corporations burning down the rainforest. You got to recycle at home. This is Slavoj Zizek actually has this critique. And as much as I love Zizek, I think he gets this idea wrong. Because the problem isn't that, like, oh, don't look at the corporations, what they're doing wrong. The problem is you won't even be able to accurately identify what is wrong and what needs to be resolved if you can't do that for yourself. If your personal alignment is off, how in the world are you going to put your perspective on something as massive as international issues or even just national issues? So that's what I think, is that you start with the individual, right? You start with yourself. And you cultivate these values in yourself. So unity. Let's break it down. Let's go, I guess, value by value.
Okay. My concern is that it's not, well, I withhold judgment at this point. And while I think I endorse what we're going to talk about, it seems unlikely that, and I'm not even sure if it's correct, that the majority of human beings will ever do any of the things we're going to talk about next. I just feel like, because it's so much more simple to, whether it's right or wrong, it doesn't matter. It's more simple to blame other things.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, look, I'm not trying to, and I don't think you're trying to suggest that there isn't a place for activism. There isn't a place for wanting to say, oh, well, this corporation is doing something terrible. Let's try to do something. I think if we're going to have a functioning democracy and representational government and all that, we do have to accept that we have a responsibility to deal with those things. But it's a bit that some sort of bizarre hubris occurs in people where they think they're going to change it all somehow through, like, just yelling at, just screaming on Twitter or wherever it is. And it's like, I think of these big forces like that, like multinational corporations. It's like the weather. It has so many different parts. It has so many different individuals that are acting within that system to make that system function in the way, so sometimes well and for the benefit of other people, but oftentimes not so.
Or both.
or both simultaneously. But it doesn't matter because it's like me going outside to the ocean and standing at the ocean and just putting my head down next to the water and just screaming at the water and expecting the ocean to move around, which I have done before. But there's something, if you look at it, I guess in another way, though, it is true that individuals do make changes. They do influence things. I mean, obviously, we know the names of historical figures that have changed things for good and for bad. So I don't know. There's just something. I just feel like people tend to default to blaming other things because it's just a lot easier than the alternative. And I'm a bit hopeless on the idea that somehow that will ever change, because it may be a part of human nature. It may just be a part of human nature for at least the majority of people, and for almost everybody some of the time.
I mean, yeah, I
don't know.
Stuff in
I
my
could be
own
wrong.
life. It's very easy when my car doesn't work. I'm like, Nissan, and it's like, well, you haven't taken your car to the mechanic in 5 years. But it feels better to like shake my fist at some, larger thing. But of course, the problem is that you stay with the problem. I'm the one that my car ends up not working because I don't take it to the mechanic and I just shake my fist at Nissan. And then my car breaks and I'm the one that suffers. And I think that's a parallel to what you're saying, is that,
maybe
attack the corporations and whatever, but in the meantime, it's kind of this like, here, this is let me get this point before I forget. One of the things that I don't like about the critique of the idea of like, oh, the individual is not is not sufficient to make the kind of change that is necessary in the world, is one, there's been, I mean, any movement that you can name in history has significant individuals involved with it. So I cannot think of any movement that did not have at least one or two individuals that created large momentum or started the movement or helped to kick it off to a level that it needed or something. Like when you look through history, there's always these key individuals that in different parts of any event or change that were integral to that happening. And of course, maybe if it wasn't them, it would have been someone else. Sure, we can say that, but it still required an individual. And so I think that the thing is, it's where it starts. Like you don't, even if you have a group, well, you need individuals, right, to enter that group. It's not just like a mass of people or something. Like first there has to be people that go there. And so, I mean, that's the thing. Everything is comprised of these smaller parts. So to negate that the smaller parts matter seems somehow incomplete. But
it's not that. It's not. This is how I see it anyway. It's not. I don't view it as that obviously a collective is made up of a collective of individuals. But the big changes, the big movements in history, the big things, I don't think, and I could be wrong, and I'm kind of just, freewheeling here, but I feel like it comes down to some factors that are very primal, like hunger, war, changes in weather patterns, all these kinds of things, which then, those are the types of forces that can really push on a large amount of people simultaneously, which then creates a collective feeling, usually in a terrible direction, which then individual leaders throughout history have not so much, it's not that they built up the circumstances, it's that they then harnessed the energy of the misery of people, and they harnessed it to move it either sometimes in positive directions, but oftentimes in terrible directions. So that's kind of how I see it. So I'm not trying to cut you off from even getting to these values, because we should explore them. Yeah. We should explore them because they're useful for people probably. But I have a skepticism of self-help. I've always had a skepticism of self-help. Though I get it, and I think that it can be useful for people. I really do, but I don't know. Convince me.
I wouldn't say this is self-help though. There's a difference. I feel like no. I think there's a difference between self-help and just like self-awareness and an attempt at like defining and developing yourself. It's not like this thing of like, well, just say this mantra every day. I mean, maybe that could help, but this self-help seems like it's more about techniques, where this is like truly getting, is philosophy self-help? Like you could argue that philosophy is self-help if it helps you define yourself and understand yourself. I don't know. It seems like I think the self-help you're talking about is a little bit like this kind of, call this 1-800 number type of thing.
You're right. I'm not trying to put this eminent psychologist into the camp of a self-help book. I'm not, and I shouldn't do that, especially before we even talk about it. But do you know what I mean? I guess what I'm talking about in the context of like how the individual can change themselves and how that will influence society or the culture. Those are big things. And my idea, and maybe I'm wrong, is that, I hope I'm wrong, is that what it comes down to so often is just like, was there a flood, or was the price of grain, did it skyrocket, somewhere at some particular time, and then that causes these things? And maybe, I don't know, that's not entirely right. Certainly the cultural groundwork, the opinions of people, all these things matter. But anyway,
weird, though,
go ahead.
Like, so think about it, because like a lot of the cultural changes that we tend to talk about here have to do with the spreading of what are essentially kind of like pop Marxism, I guess, where it's like you have people espousing ideas and not even ideas. What I notice is that people think from a postmodern framework now without even realize they're really doing it. And I think that's really, really, see, like postmodernism to me is like really one of these things that escaped the lab. It's a really cool thing in an academic setting, and it's a tool that can be very useful, but when thrown into everyday life and when given to the average person, like when it filters down to the average person as like reality as opposed to an optional tool to engage with the world, it can be extremely destructive and destabilizing. And so,
but I think that I think that you're right in a lot of ways, but I think there's two versions of what you're seeing. One of them is people, especially online, that have taken in slowly over the last couple of decades postmodern ideas, and a lot of them don't even really understand it, but it does affect the way they talk and think and all that. And I agree with you. But then I think, but I still think that's limited in scope to some degree. I finally figured out, I think, after a lot of these podcasts, I think I've figured it out, what I'm really afraid of more. It's this thing that looks similar to that. But it's a deep cynicism and a deep mistrust of almost all value structures that I see actually that's moving across society and has been working its way through society for a while. But to get back to what I'm trying to say is that I feel like that... Go ahead.
Do you think that comes from the kind of like soft leaching of Marxism and postmodernism into the culture through, whether it's through art or through like courses in university that people are getting that are kind of just like it's presented as, I know that there's been classes that my sister has taken where they present ideas like white privilege as a fact, not as a theory. And that's more on the nose, obviously. But a lot of these things have become almost the system of thought and teaching in the university. So it's like if you're getting these ideas presented to you as factual reality as opposed to a praxis for engaging with reality among many others, then that's why because I see the same thing you do. That's why I would think there would be this kind of strange cultural shift. It's so different from the generations past. Like I talk to my mom or my grandmother, and it's like you say like, oh well, good. You can't define good, and they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like this idea of that everything can be turned upside down with this kind of like postmodern critique where, well, actually good can be bad and actually bad can be good. And there's room for that because it's sometimes that's correct. But like you put that into the culture at large, how can you function? How can anybody
But what I'm
function
trying to say,
cohesively?
yes, right. But let me try to say this better. That what you're talking about, I agree with. That is happening and that is true. I think that is limited to some degree, though, to a section of educated Western middle class and up people, for the most part. And it's not that it's not a concern, and it's not that I don't have issue with it, and it's not that it can be a destructive force. But the big destructive force that I see that has been around a little around the same time, but is also now merging with this is different. So let me try to be clear.
So what is that?
I think I'm trying to say that it's a cynicism that has seeped in to everybody across class structures, across religious denominations, across geographic areas. And I think that it has something to do with this. It's almost like there's a sense and I'm talking specifically about America.
The West, or like specifically about the U.S.?
Well, I mean, I guess I could generalize to the West, but I don't live in all of America. I'm talking about America. That's where I live.
Okay,
So I'll just keep it that, because then someone from some other country will be like, no, it's not right. So I think that there's this sense that the system is rigged, and that it's hard to have values and to live with an optimistic viewpoint, and to have a sense of community, and to have a sense of cohesion, and to have any of this kind of stuff, if you feel like somehow, rightly or wrongly, and it could even be wrong, that things have ossified to such a point economically that you just don't really have a shot.
Yeah.
That it's going to be luck at best. And so that's different than this kind of postmodernism and neo-Marxism or whatever that is in universities.
To that is what
but
it
I'm
ends up
saying
being.
the big problem is, that's kind of an answer to
You
it for
see what
some
I mean?
people.
Yes, to some people.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
But for some people that
They're still out of
espouse
it,
this, no, well, I'm saying for some people that espouse that, they're doing fine. They're going to be just fine.
Oh, yeah.
So like economically, they're good. Like I don't see a lot of impoverished Marxists. And, it's totally different.
Yeah.
It's very different. But anyway, beyond that, I'm saying that I feel like there's this collision and there's this merging of a deep cynicism. And again, I know that this is going to sound insane, but because of the podcast we've been doing, I actually think I pinpoint a lot of this from the Vietnam War. I really do. I really think that at that time period, there was this moment after World War II, having this concept of ourselves as a nation of, that we, like, no one really argues about whether it was good that we were in World War II for the most part. They're like, yeah, okay, Nazis bad, fine. Yeah, a lot of death, all that. But, but then Korea comes along and Vietnam comes along. And that's really, and I could be wrong, I'm still developing these ideas, reading, trying to understand. But I see that as the point, that time point where institutional trust started to evaporate on both the left and the right, where there was this very clear sense, right or wrong, that that economic disparity meant you could get killed in a war. It wasn't just now I'm going to be poor. It's like, no, economic disparity didn't just mean that. It meant that if you're a senator's son, you get to not be at war. And if you're poor, you're in the projects, or you're some hick living where I came from, then you're drafted and you're going to get killed. And all those things, I really do believe, was kind of the beginning of this.
Yeah.
The beginning of this. But anyway, I have digressed too much. I'm going to move on. Tell Ethan Fromm, tell me how to fix it.
Well, no, I want to talk about what you said. So that was the Rambo podcast that we did. So for people listening, we go much more into how the Vietnam War seemed to be the origins of institutional mistrust on both sides. So it's important because, I mean, it's so interesting. This is why I really don't find any desire to align myself with any particular group or ideology, is that when I look at the right and the left, okay, so we can break it down into that like more basic framework. they attack each other for their different iterations of institutional mistrust, right? So they both have the same institutional mistrust. Both and there's factions within those that maybe don't have that, like more traditional, closer to center Democrats. They believe in their system for the most part. And maybe certain on the right, like more traditional conservatives that are, closer to the center also probably are not as harshly mistrustful of their system. But, the more hardcore Trump movement, a lot of that was born out of disillusionment with the system. And this desire of like, yeah, he's going to go in there and break it up. He's going to go in there and fuck it up because it's bullshit. And you have that same sentiment of like, just blow it up, destroy it. It's fake. It's a lie. It's a leech on us on both sides. And so it's important to kind of look, this is the thing about, again, we are as humans so prone to focus on the negative and to focus on the differences that we miss what's actually way more telling a lot of the time, which is what's common. And so if you look at the right and the left, what's common is deep mistrust and distrust in the systems of government. And a sense that they're being in some ways a cultural, like a kind of cultural division or war, and that's where you get these culture wars or whatever. The left is not so much. I think they're kind of like on the higher ground of the culture wars because they seem to be enacting it. The right used to be the ones that were fighting the culture war, but this is getting into like different things. Anyway, so
a brief note on this because now we're ranging wildly. I was reading several months ago a biography of Otto von Bismarck, who was a leading figure in German politics during the unification of the German state. And he purposely used culture war in order to create division strategically. He was a very, very much a genius politician in a lot of ways, but not a good person in a lot of ways either. But he used culture war as a means to get things done legislatively. But not only that, he used it to keep his own power. And I think there's also, beyond all the culture war stuff, I think that when you get, like, I get cynical about that in and of itself because I see that no matter how it ends up, I know the only people who are going to benefit are people that already are in power.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, it's like anytime you say, oh, there's a war, well, yeah, someone's going to win, someone's going to lose. Actually, there's just going to be widespread destruction amongst both parties. And yeah, technically someone may win or someone may lose. That's why personally I don't go on Twitter. That's why I try to keep a measured pace as we talk about this. I like to talk about, and I kind of derailed this into this more modern version thing. I do actually like to find answers in philosophy and psychology and history and those kinds of things because I think those are more stable and more potentially useful things.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, the thing is that like that's one of the things that bothers me about all the ongoings in the culture and the mainstream discussion, whatever it is. I mean, you can just turn on the news and it doesn't matter what channel it is, and you're just watching, totally perfectly played out manipulation tactics, and it's just like the bad guys are coming. We got to do something quick. This is life or death. Like, these are all the most basic manipulation tactics to make people feel like they don't have an option and that like the stakes are high. And of course, then that kind of division, I think we spoke about this, I don't know in which podcast, but basically the idea that when the stakes are so high, or that you feel they are, and when you don't have a lot of options, you don't take risks with being like, well, I'm not going to vote for this person, or I'm going to vote for a third party or whatever, or, I'm going to, look for this middle ground or whatever. People are way more likely to go to the extreme out of a sense of fear and urgency. And so that division, of course, benefits whoever is in power at the time, or whoever is using that fear and urgency as a a momentum for their own power grab. And that's to me like a red flag. I'm sorry. If some like it's there are some things what I can be very urgent in my language, like when I see, bald-faced censorship attempts by the government and by, these massive companies that own means of communication that really should be treated as rights for people to speak because they give everybody an equal voice. And that's what freedom of speech is, right? We all have the right to speak. Well, if some people have the right to speak much more loudly than others, suddenly our free speech, our right, is not as equal as the rights of others. So, I mean, those things make me feel really like this is urgent, this is serious, like this is a bad situation. But, there's other framings where it's like everything, every day, whatever the issue is, it's like, this is the end of the world. This is the worst thing ever. So people just get panicked and they get holed into their like, this is my bunker and I'm ready to go down with my party or whatever. And there's no room for nuance. There's no room for questioning because how dare you question your side if in these urgent times, So I think that's a classic manipulation tactic that people should be very vigilant of and suspicious of. But let's go back now a little bit. I think that observation of the cynicism that's pervading the culture and it transcends the barriers of religion or politics or anything like this is really important because it is, I don't totally understand. Okay, so yes, so it seems to come from that major cultural turning point, right? Where both the left and the right in the United States saw through the Vietnam War and through the deception and through the kind of like a clear division between the institution and the people it served, right? Where it was like the first time where you started to really feel like it's very clear that this thing is not working for us, perhaps, is what it is. And I think that, and of course, this was like the time of like the 60s and the 70s, right? Where you already had these major cultural upheavals, like the psychedelics and like free love and the hippie movement and all of that. That's like already in its own way, it was a strange, hopeful mix of that anti-institutional ethos, right? It was like this sense of, well, we're gonna make our own thing. Let's leave the institutions behind. Like, fuck all this old traditional shit. Fuck all these rules. We're going to live in a new way. But that didn't happen. And I think now, and this goes kind of like what we touched on with, I think it was the first Fight Club episode, where I feel like that movie is such a good morning after for this idea of like, we're going to live in a different world than our parents did. We're going to change things. We're going to be freer. We're going to be more progressive. And then you woke up and you had to go to your shitty office job and you couldn't find meaning in your life and the institutions were still sucking you dry. And what then? And I think that's where that cynicism really starts to get so deeply pervasive and rooted into the culture that it becomes almost our culture. It becomes our culture to be cynical and to be mistrustful of not only the institution. Is the thing that's so scary about that is that I think it becomes a perspective, right? Because like in so many ways, your culture is your perspective. It's how you look at the world. It's the lens through which you understand the world. So when your culture is cynicism, is mistrust, I mean, does it become like this kind of a Ouroboros culture where it eats itself eventually? Because if you look at what Fromm talks about, right? So the Freedom 2, that's the opposite of that kind of cultural cynicism that you're describing, that you notice and that I notice and that I think everybody notices. I mean, I get tired, man. I get tired every day. Like, I can't even go on social media anymore because everything is like, this is bad. And it's just like, oh my gosh, I know, like, we know that things are bad and that like some things are definitely bad and whatever. But it's like, it's almost trendy. It's almost like this, like, it's an ethos to be cynical. It's a
But
thing.
this is again where I'll give you a praxis. Here's my praxis for social media. Mute and block half the people that are there, right? Because you know who they are. They're not bad people. They may be friends, but you just don't want to. You're bored. It's no bored. Right?
No, I don't need to consume their mental illness every day. Yeah.
Right. Just have fun with it. Look at jokes. Look at memes. That kind of stuff. Forget about the rest of it. Get away from it. Like cultivate it. Yeah. Use it for enjoyment. That's like you. And I say this because I have such a like. I barely really use it, and I don't know how to use social media very correct. I don't know how to use it right anyway, so it doesn't really even matter. And I get it's a bigger problem for you, and I've just gone years without even like caring about it or knowing about it. But so it's easier for me in a way maybe to do that, where I can see where you would have to like disentangle yourself from a bunch of different webs of things that cause you distress.
It's hard because I mean like. You want to draw a line between being like creating a kind of like happy echo chamber and then still kind of keeping your finger on the pulse of what's going on in society. But it's also tricky because how real is that? You know, we get into this situation where like, is the picture that's painted by the news really what's going on in the world? No. You know, it's not, because they cherry pick all the worst things and they leave out, you know, the nuance, and they leave out the actual progress that happens. You know, like I listened to this episode of Jordan Peterson's podcast with Marianne Tupy, the one that says like the episode is 10 trends every smart person should know. And they talk about all this data that's been collected by, you know, pretty massive organizations like the Cato Institute and whatever. And that show that there's so much progress going on in the world. Like famine is reduced, poverty is reduced, like so many positive changes have happened. But we live in this other reality where everything's getting significantly worse and everything is horrible. And you can ask anyone, like, how is the state of the world? And it's like, they will solidly tell you things are bad, things are worse. And there are some things that are worse, right? Like because of this cultural cynicism, that is actually worse in and of itself, but it also kind of warps you to feel that things are worse, regardless of what the data shows about different changes in the world.
What I'm trying to get at, and with many things I say in this podcast, I say it off the cuff and I'm not endorsing anything because a lot of times I'm just talking. But what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to figure out, I'm joking a little bit, but I'm trying to figure out as we go and as we talk. So what I'm trying to say is this. So there's this podcast and a book called 10 Trends That Are Great Things Are Happening or whatever. And then someone over here could write a book, 10 Bad Trends That Means We're All Doomed. And both could be right or wrong and whatever. That's not my point is this. I wake up, I go about my day. And I know that it would be foolish for me to say that none of those trends affect me. I'm sure they do to some degree. But in our minute to minute, day to day, hour to hour life, the good and the bad trends they don't really affect the majority of us. And so then we find ourselves in this weird, and the reason I had to stop like reading the news as much. I've read the news for like I've been like I know politics, I know history, I know poli-sci stuff. I pay attention. I read magazines, The Economist, all the I for a long time I paid a lot of attention. But there's this. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's good if it's your job or if it's you want to be that person that's informed or if it's your entertainment in a bizarre way. That was my entertainment, is to be informed to some degree. But if you don't do anything, if you're just this consumer of information, whether it's a consumer of information that's about the 10 trends that are great or the 10 trends that are bad, it just doesn't. You're like this. It doesn't matter. You're such as an individual. It matters to me more if I walk down the stairs and stub my toe that if global warming is going to kill me in 20 years, or if food will be genetically modified food will make sure that starvation doesn't exist anymore and everyone's happy and lives in utopia. Neither of those, whether one of them's right or wrong or whatever it is, it doesn't matter, because really what mainly matters is that I walk down the stairs and stub my toe. I'm saying that, like, to get too caught up in what's happening with society, when unless you are I did this for a while. I did this for a while. I specifically set myself a goal that what I would do instead of looking at the news is I would find one thing that bothered me. It could be a small thing that bothered me. And then what I would do, I did this for a couple months and I quit, is I would actually write a small email or letter to someone who might actually have the ability to slightly change it. And I would do this on a kind of local level, and this was my antidote to this sense of helplessness of, the rainforest is being chopped down. And you feel anxiety, or you feel this or that.
And you feel helpless. Yeah, that's one of the things that I think is so dangerous about the news cycle now. It's so, I think we take for granted how unnatural it is for us as individuals to be, like, not even just getting this news, but like locked in constantly to these updates that are about things that are so massive they actually in some cases do not matter in our lifetimes. And yeah, of course it's like, well, I care about what's going to happen in my kids' lifetime, and yeah, you should, but like, do you need an update every day about these massive world changes that are not even going to occur in your lifetime? I mean, maybe check in on the world that'll happen in your kid's lifetime once a month or something, like it's a strange
and then do
ability.
Something about it. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Because then you remove
check
that
in,
helplessness.
And maybe let's look. Is this one of Fromm's? Am I accidentally getting to one of his values and pursuing positive
here's
freedom?
a cool one. Accomplishment, right? So there's this element that he says that comprises positive freedom, which is to strive for things, but then also to accomplish things. And so you can see how this kind of culture of yelling at like Nestle or whatever on Twitter is the opposite of that. Because one, you're not really striving for something if there's not an actual tangible goal that you can achieve. And that's that's a really loose, statement. Because yeah, of course you can say, well, I want to work for improving the environment. Well, that's not an actionable goal. So it's fine to say that, but then you need to break it down and say, well, I want to do a beach cleanup every week. I want to get this legislation passed in my local area. Okay, those are things you can actually accomplish. And then you can strive for the larger value or larger goal of improving the environment. But that really isn't like the realistic goal. What it needs to be is like something you can do. And that's why I think people go astray and we just make ourselves miserable saying like, oh, I want to fix global warming. Like, shut the fuck up. Like, that's not real. Let's just drop that from your mind. I want to stop global warming. Like, that's as much as you care about it, or if you don't care about it, whatever kind of thing it is, that's a goal. That type of framing is going to make a person insane, no matter what the topic is. Or I want to stop racism. Are you insane? Are you insane? Like, that's how this is like an endemic human trait, to be in group, out group. What you can do is, break it down and say, well, I want to raise awareness. So I'm going to start an organization, and that organization is going to teach about, equality or whatever. Okay, now we're talking about things that can actually be finished, right? So that goes to what you're saying. Like, you kind of naturally sought that out of like, okay, well, if I want to improve my world and because I see these problems in it, let me actually take that on in ways that are tangible and accomplishable.
And beyond, and even to a smaller level of, don't go start an organization to raise awareness, or do if you want to, but like, go pick up a piece of trash and actually try to be nice to someone, or like listen to somebody, or have a decent conversation with someone who isn't from the same race or the same religion or the same whatever. And the thing that I actually think that is interesting is that I think, and this is where I could be overly optimistic, is that I think that on that that basic human to human, day to day level, for the most part, and that's speaking only from my limited experience and in the country I live in, we get along for the most part. It's not perfect. There's problems. There's strife. The beach, I saw some trash down there when I went for a walk on the beach to scream at the ocean.
Yeah.
I got down there. I decided, I'm not going to scream at you, ocean. I'm just going to walk along, There's a little bit of trash, but not too much trash. There's I don't know. Again, I don't want to go overly optimistic. I'm just saying that, like, going to the smallest level you can. People make fun of this because really it's that Jordan Peterson idea of clean up your room and then that's the way to fix your room, right?
That's a
but
cynicism,
it really,
to discount that.
It kind of does work if nothing else.
Yeah.
It does make you feel better. And if you feel better, you're less likely to be
a shitty person
and terrible to other people. And then maybe that somehow resonates outward.
See,
I don't know.
That's what I think is lost in the criticism of the idea of starting with the individual, is that there's this idea that it's so futile. And it's like, well, what are you going to do if you have a country of useless, miserable individuals? Oh, you're going to enact some amazing social change? You're going to create a culture of progressivism with individuals that are miserable and hate themselves and hate other people? Like, that's not going to happen. What you're going to get is a culture of miserable people that hate each other and hate themselves. So it's like...
But see, on the right or the left or whatever political spectrum, or forget about politics, or if you're just a cult leader or you're whatever it is, if you are a person that wants to, for right or wrong, manipulate large masses of people, that is exactly the type of person you want. You want a hopeless person. You want a hopeless, cynical person who's looking for an answer, because you're not going to create a movement. Again, even if your movement had good intentions, I think that a lot of times movements require desperation and desperate people. Well, and sometimes for real reasons, there are desperate people that need that and need a movement. Fine. But I don't think most people don't. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I just feel like
the other thing
people
is
who are...
Yeah, people that are well-adjusted and are content and secure, they're much more careful. They don't, and that goes back to that idea of like this fear-mongering urgency, the world is ending culture, creating this situation that's ripe for malicious actors to take more power. Because when people feel secure, they're more critical of things. So if I come to you and I'm like, hey, I have this idea, it'll help us all, and you're doing good and you feel good, you're not going to be like, whatever, fuck it, let's go. You're going to be much more careful and critical of what is presented to you, because you're not acting from that place of urgency or anger or desperation. And so that's the thing. Like, that's truly why I spend so much of my work is focused on helping individuals define themselves. And like, it's a process that I am undergoing myself always, and I just try to transmute that into my own work so that people can then use it for themselves, because I'm not like, I don't want to have a movement. I just don't trust any movement that ignores the individual, because it makes me think, well, you're probably capitalizing off the discontent of the individual, which means you're probably not actually trying to look for a better world, because what kind of better world are you going to build with a movement built off of disillusioned individuals? Like, when do we get back to the individuals and their problems? So and this is the point of this book, right? This is the point of Escape from Freedom, is that when you have these healthy, secure, relatively, it don't have to be like, the Ubermensch, but like people that feel more defined in themselves, that are not looking for that like a sudden relief, that escape, then you have this natural protection against those kind of unscrupulous power grabs that come from authoritarianism or just cults and all of that.
And to bring it to a more personal level, though, and I think we all, or at least I sense this, and I think a lot of people will sense this, that if you have anxiety or whatever it is, I think most people know from experience that they're more susceptible to suggestion during those times. They're more susceptible to trying to solve their problem in a way that may not be healthy and may be a bit more radical. So, I just think that that's how human beings work. You're capable of slowing yourself down and making a quote unquote good decision sometimes about simple things, whether it's about overeating or drinking too much or smoking too much or whatever it may be. I just see that if you're a person that is rife with anxiety and not knowing what's going on, you look for those. You're always looking for something that'll,
it's an escape.
Yeah. I mean, look, and I'm in no way. I'm not trying to be a self-help book here, and I'm not trying to be. I mean, we all know that I'm trying to maybe start a cult. I'm hedging on that, but it's something I've seen in my, and we've all seen in our own lives, right? I mean, if you're that type of person. Or if you're in a phase of your life where you're feeling anxiety or these types of things, I feel like you're much more prone to take suggestion from outside, and to take it quickly. We all take suggestions from outside sources, but to take it quickly without thinking about it too much.
Yeah, that lack of a critical eye in accepting.
It's dangerous.
Suggestion. Yeah, well, I mean, that's how people get into a lot of trouble, because the more desperate and urgent you feel in trying to escape some type of discomfort, whether it's anxiety or a serious depression or something, that's why people do things that are not reversible either. That's one of the major problems with depression or something, is that people reach this level of just total suffering and a sense of hopelessness that it's I need to get out. And it's that's when you do something irreversible. And so it's of course, if you were in your more critical, secure state of being, you would be, well, maybe I shouldn't, jump off a bridge to get out of this discomfort. You would be a little more critical of your options for getting out of discomfort. I mean, so that's the thing, is you got to be careful, because the neo-Marxists will sell you the bridge to jump off of. That's my that's my philosophy. No, everyone will. That's the thing that I get so tired, is that anywhere you look, it's just people being here, this is the easy answer. And it's no, it's not, you fucking liar. It's not that easy. I mean, it's taken us centuries and centuries to build the society we have now, that's one of the better functioning societies in the world. Again, one of this kind of weird, warped, cynical views is oh, this place is the worst. Compared to what? Compared to where? What? So, but that's that thing. It's when you get into that warped sense of oh, everything is hopeless. I feel like this is a horrible time. Well, let's just burn it down and start again. Suddenly, these rash escapes seem more reasonable. So let's go now to really focus on the positive freedom, or freedom 2. So here is, I always I get edgy when I try to get into these ideas, because I find them hard to relay without a kind of here's the list of values.
Well, just relay it, because we've circled around this idea so long that
so
just hit it like a hawk, like an idea hawk. Circling around that's what it is. It's an idea hawk. We've been circling around freedom 2.
Okay.
Now center in and pick that virtue up and give it to the people.
So here's the thing. I think, again, this is actually something that I like to come back to in all of my work, which is using values to define yourself and to kind of create a framework for how to go about the world, because then you don't really need these ideologies. And that's why I get so frustrated when I see people get so beholden to these dusty systems, is that you don't need the rules here to do that. You can define these values for yourself. Stop it! Stop rushing me! Stop it!
We've talked. We have the idea hawk.
Leave me
what
alone.
Is the unity? Unity is one of the values. It is unity. We are not showcasing unity right now on this podcast.
You destroyed my entire intro. You should be fired from this podcast for that. That's such a horrible thing to do. I was setting it up. It's not even... Is the clock? Is the nicotine? We need to just hook you up.
No, it's
to
not
a little
the nicotine that we've taught. You keep saying freedom 2 is really hard to talk about.
I'm gonna treat you like a hysterical woman and just be like, "Is it that time? Is it your time for your nicotine?"
I mean, the idea hawk is lost in the fucking clouds. Just read the goddamn word that he said solved all the problems.
No, it's not a word that solves all the problems. See, you're a charlatan.
Well, then this is useless.
No, it's
useless.
Good job. Good Shakespeare. Job. Thank you, patrons. You are paying for a useless podcast. Thank you. You heard it here first. Shut the fuck up and let me do this. Right. Seriously, I'm gonna mute you or something.
Yeah, go. Jesus.
So look,
Christ.
when you boil things down, and this is something that I've said before, is that you don't make the joke.
I just like how you're looking off. You're like trying to do it, but you're looking away from the screen because you know that I'm going to make like the bird hawk gesture.
I'm going to block the screen off so you can just gesture yourself in the dark. So here's the thing. It's weird. I think people get values, right? They get their values, and people do this. You get your values from religion, right? Religion tells you, well, don't lie, be compassionate, and here are the morals that you should follow. And so you can get your values from these systems. But I'm really suspicious of getting values from systems like particularly systems that have led to atrocities historically, because perhaps it is not doing a very good job of relaying those values, or perhaps those values aren't actually contained within the ideology, is what people don't seem to understand. And you don't need the ideology for that. So here are some of the ones, right? So unity is one of the values for positive freedom. Identity. And this is an important thing to kind of like settle on, because you can see how people are constantly looking for identities by aligning themselves with whatever group. So it's, I'm of this, background, I'm of this politic, I'm this, I'm that, whatever. And I find those identities are very dusty, and I think they're divisive, and I don't think that they do justice to the individual, because it's like, really, that's your identity, woman? Wow. How unique. Like, that doesn't do justice to you as a person. That's a really archaic, dusty way to give yourself an identity. And historically, we have fought against being defined by such identity. So it's such an interesting thing to see, like race or feminism and things like this go from, please look at us as individuals, look at what we do, look at our achievements, look at our abilities and our talents and our personalities, not just our appearance or our sex or our race or our religion. And now it's like, I am my race, I am my sex, these are the most important things about me. This is the opposite of the kind of identity that should be forged for positive freedom. Because that's kind of what it is, right? You're free from being defined by these immutable characteristics that you did nothing to choose. Now you're free to create an individual identity that you define for yourself. But of course, that's where people falter. And so maybe that's why we see this resurgence in identities that are based on things that you actually don't do anything to define or to gain. Creation is the other thing. So creation and accomplishment, striving, which is the thing that we kind of went on. And so I think this is really the most important thing to me, is that if you take these values and you put them into practice in your life, then you'll see that, well, let's see, do these things actually play out in these other ideologies? Like leftism today, or right-wing or conservative politics, like, do they contain the value of unity? Is that something that's being pursued through these ideologies? And no, you can see actually, particularly, I see it very clearly in leftism, though conservatism in the past also has been guilty of this, and I think in some ways, like, shittier versions of it today are also guilty of it, obviously. It's divisive. So it's actually the opposite of what Fromm advocates as freedom 2. Instead of pursuing unity and trying to create more of it, you can see these ideologies purposely sow division. So there, right there, is you see we have a problem, right? Where the things that people are looking to give them identity, to give them meaning, to bring about a better world, supposedly, are in contradiction to the values that Fromm espouses as being something for a positive freedom. So I don't know. I think like these are such important things but they're really things that like I think the problem is that I can't sit here and tell people like, here's how to be free. It's not like that. I can tell you what he says are these values, and we can add on to those. We can define more of them. Like we can break it down. How am I free? How are you free? Like how do we do that ourselves in our everyday lives? But it's not an instruction manual. And the whole point is that anyone that gives you an instruction manual on being free is not actually interested in you being free. They're telling you how to live. So I think that's why this is such a hard part of the book to cover in this way. It's like,
yeah, I think it's impossible, actually. I don't blame you anymore.
Thank you.
I mean, I blame you a little bit, but I don't blame you entirely. Because, look, I don't know. Okay, so I don't... Yeah, these values... I don't know. I'm very distrustful of this. I've become distrustful.
You are the cynic that you condemn.
I'm not cynical. I just have a deep and powerful suspicion of everything.
Oh my God.
So I need to read this quote.
Yeah, you should.
There is only one possible productive solution for the relationship of individualized man with the world. Right there, I'm not sure about that. I don't know if there's only one possible solution. I don't like that. Stop telling me there's only one way to do this. All right. And then, he goes on. His active solidarity with all men. I don't like that. That in and of itself, I don't like being in solidarity with everybody. Something makes me I don't want it.
It's
I
how
don't
you define
like it.
this. Okay, it's how you define it. Like, do you go out and purposely try to sow chaos? Do you go out and in your life and like try to be disagreeable? I think solidarity isn't. No, you don't.
A bit disagreeableness. A bit. No, I don't sow chaos.
Not on purpose, though. There's a difference between like I think being contrarian and disagreeable to an end that's positive, and as opposed to the kind of like contrarian attitude that's like, I'm just gonna say the opposite of everything because that's what I do.
Sure.
Like that shit is annoying because it's like, well, you can actually get very far away from anything productive or truthful by doing that. So solidarity to me means a kind of like cooperation. Not
it
per
sounds
se like let's join hands and build the labor workers of the world unite type of thing. I mean, maybe he is kind of getting his little.
I think
workers
he
of the
is.
world
I
unite
feel like
in there, right?
I feel like he's sneaking his Marxism in a bit. We talked about this.
Solidarity is a red word.
It is a red word. It sounds like it, but beyond the politics again. But But I think he is, and to be fair, obviously he's coming out of a historical moment in a different and particular school, coming out of the experience of Nazi Germany. I get it. I understand why the politics is there, but I'm trying to look at it in terms of psychology, and I'm always split between trying to analyze things in this podcast of what I think is probably useful and good for people in general, but also what I find useful and what I like. Take
care there, because you live a life. If everybody lived your life, we'd be in the Stone Age. Sorry. We'd have a lot of great art, but it'd be on the cave walls.
Didn't we cover this in Fight Club? Wasn't that the whole point? And the whole fucking point of Fight Club was let's go back to hunter-gatherer life. I don't live like a hunter-gatherer. All I'm trying to say is that I don't know what active solidarity with all men and his spontaneous activity. I don't want spontaneous activity going around me.
You are spontaneous activity. You are spontaneous activity. Here's the thing. See, the problem is with a book like this, and this is my one, well, not my one criticism, but one of the criticisms I have of this book is that he is not the most passionate writer or the most descriptive writer. So you end up with what kind of sounds more like these functional terms, which is something you get from like clinical psychology, but also these politically tinged terms, which of course comes from his like he's fair like versed in politics. It's not just pure psychology, you know. So but spontaneous activity and spontaneity is a really cool concept in this book because it helped me understand what freedom is to a degree. So we use spontaneous, right? Kind of like this, like, oh, it's just all of a sudden or whatever. Well, spontaneous means like it's the kind of it requires a level of freedom that allows you to just act of your own volition, right? Where you're not having this inner critic that is constantly trying to filter out, like, is this okay? Would people like this? That's not free. That's actually not freedom. And of course, we all have that to a degree. But the goal is to kind of push past that so that you are able to express yourself and act more spontaneously than as opposed to like think of someone that lives under like a harsh regime where I never, you know, truly I think people don't even understand how fucked up a communist regime can make you, because when you have a system like that is so strict, and I think people are starting to feel it, like if they're in the culture enough on the left and like online and all that shit, you get this inner voice that filters everything that first comes out of you through the, is this okay? Is this allowed? Would this be wrong? You know, and it stifles who you actually are because it immediately tries to filter the impulses that come out of you, which are the spontaneous impulses, right? Through whatever is the authority to you. So maybe your authority are your peers, right? Maybe that's who you care most about is, well, will this be acceptable to my peers? And that means you've created an authority upon yourself. So you're not really free then. If your actions end up being more determined by your peers or your political group or your religion, even, like, these things become an authority, and maybe some of those authorities are okay, you know, like you have to, if you're at work, you don't say, well, what do I want to do right now? You think, well, is this okay in this situation? Well, there's an authority there, right? It's your boss, and so you have to kind of parse that out. But what you end up, especially like with a communist regime that was so crazy to me, like hearing how my mom lived under this and what it does to you, is that you end up with this inner voice of the regime in your head. Like you have an impulse and then you're like, that's not allowed. I would get in trouble for that. As soon as you have the impulse, and then you mutilate the impulse either to let a little bit of it out that won't get you in trouble or to stifle it because you know that you can't. That's
fair.
the
Good point,
opposite
and good
of spontaneous activity.
Fine. Let me continue with this quote as we wind down, and you tell me what is right and wrong about it. All right. So to go back, there's only one possible productive solution for the relationship of individualized man with the world. Again, skeptical of only one possible productive solution. But fine. It's his idea. His active solidarity with all men, again, not a big fan, and his spontaneous activity. You've explained that. I get that. That makes sense. I semi-endorse it. Love and work, which unite him again with the world. Not by primary ties, but as a free and independent individual. What are primary ties? What does he mean by that here?
So we covered this in the first half of this podcast. So primary ties are an important part of this book. And there's the legitimate primary ties, right? Which is, as a child, your primary ties are to your parents, your mother, in the most immediate sense. As a tribe member, your primary ties would have been to your fellow tribe members. So these are like the
fealty you owe.
Yeah.
And peasant,
you know what I mean?
to knight or whatever. That's what he means. Those relations, like when we were talking about the medieval part of. Okay, all right, gotcha.
And so as those fell away, right? So as the child develops self-awareness, as the feudal system allows for you to move beyond those primary ties and no longer be dictated by the structure of society, as you no longer live in a tribe where you depend on your other tribe members to dictate where you guys are going and what's allowed and all that, suddenly you're without these primary ties. And that creates this feeling of the isolation. And we went into that in the beginning, the idea of moral isolation, where you can be physically alone, but at least you have those primary ties with your group. So his theory is that that there's the sense of isolation that comes from lacking those primary ties is so anxiety inducing that people try to recreate them, but you can't. And that's, again, that kind of like common theme of you cannot go back. And this is like it's a cool thing. It's a thing I see pop up a lot in different ideas, which is like Nietzsche's idea of like post-religion, Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey of like, there's like that part of the story where it's like, I want to go back. And it's like, nope, it's the path has closed, and he argues that you cannot go back to those primary ties. And if you try to, that's when a problem comes. That's when you see people kind of like, and it's funny because I've kind of re-understood the idea of like the quote unquote nanny state, right? So you'd always hear this, and it's kind of like this like conservative kind of like little zinger at the left. And I was like, oh, well, it's okay for the state to kind of take care of people in some way. Like, that's fine. There's role for that. But I think there's a better way to understand that criticism, and it's through this idea of primary ties. There is a kind of desire for the nanny state in a way that it's actually kind of like the mother state, okay? It's not even just this nanny state idea, because that's too tainted already politically. But it's this desire to seek that primary tie, that security, and that sense of I'm part of something larger and safe in something that's not meant to do that. So that's where you get a cult. That's where you get this desire for authoritarian leadership that tells you everything that you'll do, almost like it's your parent that tells you what you will watch, what you will consume, who you're allowed to be around. It takes on this role of, the larger authority, like a mother or a tribe once was.
Yeah, the problem then I see this clearer now in this quote, but the problem with the conservative side of it, if I'm getting this, his kind of opinion is that, and this is broadly speaking again, we speak in generalities, we have to, as we talk about the left and the right and this and that. But from what I can see, what he would say is, well, the conservative side is trying to reestablish primary ties which are no longer valid for whatever reasons because the social situation has changed. And I think that's probably right, because you see that so like Roger Scruton is a British, or he was, he's dead now, a British conservative thinker, philosopher, and he was very much this idea of going back to tradition, constantly looking to traditions in order to preserve things as they are. And I see Fromm here as critiquing that by saying, well, even if that were good or bad or whatever, if that were good, you can't, because you're kind of LARPing through the idea, like, what are you really going to do? Pledge fealty to your landowner? It's exactly. Those primary ties are gone. So maybe the problem is with the conservative thing is they always are calling back to these things that, unfortunately, and I do really think unfortunately a lot. Like, I'm not happy that people people distrust the Catholic Church or the Protestant. I'm not particularly enthusiastic about the idea that people have lost all faith in institutions. I don't dance around thinking, even though I may not be into those things, but it's a kind of a mean person that revels in another person's loss of faith in something. That's a little bit that kind of
lust for destruction then, because it's like, what do you, if you really take that seriously, which is the Nietzschean approach to religion that I think people mistake in that God is dead idea. It really wasn't celebratory. It was a warning, and if you take that seriously now, I'm just like, when I see people that have religion, I really don't feel anything. Like, if anything, I'm just like, okay, maybe they'll be okay, because it is like, it's a question in a way of like, because it is interesting, people that still do have like religion, right? That are they believe and they practice, not just kind of like, yeah, I believe whatever. Like that's a different situation. But people that truly do practice their religion, because it's somehow they've maintained the ability to get what they need from religion in a way that seems to be increasingly impossible for many. And I think we're going to see that play out in generations, because it's like, you got to imagine now the younger generations, like now, how much like pull are they going to feel towards religion as a place of meaning? I mean, there may be actually a resurgence as a kind of like, last like death throes of religion or something. But again, it's this idea of like, can you go back? I don't know, but I actually don't feel any. They are what?
This has been happening since this time period I located during the 60s and the Vietnam War, the New Age.
They show up in,
go back a little bit.
That's right.
So crystals and fucking all kinds of little things.
That's the thing. It's like,
a stand-in.
Is it real? You know, like,
it's a stand-in.
Yeah.
And you got this, this is too speculative right now.
My problem is that those things become like, if they're not solid in the way that like, hey, okay, again, like what I'm trying to say is that when I see someone that truly has religion, I'm like, good for you. Like maybe if whatever situation happened to me, that's not what worked out for me as a system of belief, I would have hoped that I would have that, like it is a strong way to navigate the world. And it's been used for thousands of years. So at least it's kind of tried, Of course, it has its problems for sure, but a human being can pervert any system, no matter how noble it purports to be.
I have no problem with it as long as they don't start making a bunch of fucking rules and laws that then I have to live under. And that is, again... That was the problem. I think that this is why I just, and I'm really trying to stay positive as we near the end of the podcast. I'm really trying. I'm trying. But
positive.
I just feel like that left or right, conservative or liberal, I just feel like it's a big ask what this guy is asking people to do. And maybe it's the only I'm going to, it's hard because we could explore this for a long time, but but I think that I'm happy enough with freedom from other people. and then we can all practice freedom too in our own time as best we can, but it's a big ask, man. And if that's what's necessary to keep totalitarian regimes at bay, I hope everybody who listens to this podcast starts to work real hard, real fast, because I don't know,
I think that, I think it sounds very lofty because maybe the language he's using is very revolutionary type of shit. But like, I think there was a period where we were obtaining freedom too. And I think that, there was this period in American history where it was kind of like you wanted to have the American dream, right? Like that whole era of like, I want to have a family. I want to have a good job. I want to have like my house, take my vacation, all this shit that it was kind of like there was this, but again, that has to do with the value structure that was trusted at the time. And it was seen as a noble thing and a possible thing and something you could strive and reach for. But then you get this rift in the culture that ripples seemingly through every area of culture and leaves people with no longer a sense of trust in their ability to obtain. And I think that was what freedom 2 was. There was this sense of like, I'm free to pursue a life I want. And of course, that's complicated because at the same time, you have the farther you go back, the more you have legitimate inequality between races, between sexes. And you even can go back to a time when there was less freedom from the government, right? Like where there were actually some more like Woodrow Wilson with his like anti-treason laws or something that didn't allow people to dissent against the war and stuff. And so there it's not that black and white, obviously, but I think the difference is when people lose that ability to believe in freedom too, and they become so jaded with their ability to pursue a genuine identity, to pursue creation, whether it's creation of a family or a business or art. These are different ways to create. And I think that's one of the key things in his book about what freedom 2 is that it's creation as opposed to destruction. And I think that's so important when we look, so much of the cultural discussion is just about like what's wrong, what's not working, what should be done away with. And when it comes to like, okay, well, what are we striving for? What's coming out of this? It's like so utopian and so unrealistic and so like, very little details and very unplanned. And so it's like, we're not really truly striving for anything. We're not really even believing in our sense of being able to pursue striving and accomplishment. There's much less unity than ever before. Well, for a while, for at least in my lifetime. And I think, in a way, when you have a culture that becomes so obsessed with criticism and deconstruction and figuring out the conspiracies behind everything, creation falls by the wayside. Like I think about it like recently. So there was like the Bezos and all these people like going to space and whatever. And I thought about how different it was, how we looked at this now as a culture. Like the first thing I just see is like disdain for it and like resentment and cynicism and like sarcasm about it. And I think that has to do, of course, when you have a culture, like when you have people that feel like, well, I don't have what I need, so fuck these guys going to space when I can't pay my student loans and stuff. Like there's this sense of resentment, but that goes back to this thing of like, no longer can you look at a loan and be like, well, this is something I took on that's fair and it's a process for me to get somewhere else. Now it's like, well, this loan is actually like corrupt, and the whole process by which I had to get it is corrupt, and I shouldn't even have to take out this much money for it. And those are legitimate criticisms. And that comes back to some of the real things that I think if we are going to criticize and try to improve things and, fix things, these are the things that should be really under focus, which is, why do people feel like there's no real path upward for them? Why is there so much disillusionment in all the mechanisms for creating a life? That's where the real problems are, in my opinion, that should be focused on. And anything else that focuses on all these little like cultural minutia or whatever the fuck it is, like who cares? Like that's not going to actually give anybody meaning. That keeps people angry and disillusioned, and it makes them easy to manipulate. And that's the point of Fromm's book, is that when you don't have those qualities of freedom 2, people are much more easily swayed into these larger corrupt ideologies and systems. So it's a hopeful thing. I think it's a hopeful thing. I really do, because I think anything that tells you that there is... Ya? I do
do
because
ya?
I do. I do.
Do you want to
do?
I think, okay, I'll give you the last word, but I want to give everybody a little self-help advice.
Oh, God.
This just becomes self-help advice. And this is the way to
From the cave.
Stop totalitarianism in all of its guises. Make things, even if it's not good, make it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go out, unify yourself with the ocean. Don't scream at the ocean. I suggested earlier that I screamed at the ocean. I don't. I sing songs to the ocean. That's what I do. I go swim and I sing songs to the ocean.
All right.
Like so
pagan?
I might be talk about my religion on this podcast. And then also, hold on. I'm trying to give the advice to the people so they can do better. Unity. I told you unity with the ocean through singing to it. Identity. I suggest is taking on multiple identities for fun, creation. We talked about that, right? Accomplishment, goes without saying, just, accomplish some stuff every day. And I want to take this moment. I want to be very brief that, I'm starting a health and wellness channel, a kind of fitness, health and wellness channel that I know that you endorse and that you want to, and that this is my way of reaching out and improving the world. And it's untitled yet, but it's just me reading out passages of existential philosophy, screaming it, not at the ocean, and doing push-ups. That's it. And so I want all of you to join.
This advertisement has not been approved. Is this podcast sponsored by you? By your wellness channel?
When it comes out, yeah, I'll consider that. So be on the lookout.
Alrighty. If you would like to go insane in the cave, that's what you should call your wellness channel. Cave Insanity.
I feel really sane, and I know that's usually a bad sign.
Yeah,
that's when they because they say, well, as long as you feel insane, you're not. But lately, I've been feeling real grounded.
That's pretty crazy.
Yep.
That's my natural reaction is to call it that. So that can tell you about that. Well, no, I feel hopeful. Not about your I don't know what you're doing there with your wellness channel. I mean, I feel hopeful for that too. It's hopeful. Great. Join it. It doesn't exist yet, but join it, I guess. I don't know. Do whatever. Do anything. Do something. That's what I think it is. It's like stop yelling at people and, complaining and destroying. And I really think like if people align themselves with these positive values, it sounds like we're in a new age podcast. I threw the mic. If you align yourself with these positive values, you'll be at a higher vibration. But read the book, maybe. That's a good start, though, is to actually read the book.
Do you really need to read the book? We've done a 3-hour podcast. Are you sure they need to read the book?
They should.
Should they?
Because it's a lot. It's just a good book to read, man. It's not even that hard to read. It's not that long, and it really breaks down these ideas into something more real than we could do in a podcast. But that's it. Read the book or don't read the book. Just listen to this podcast, but become an individual. That's how we end every podcast. I mean, that's what Nietzsche said. Remember Nietzsche's quote, become yourself. Is that what it is? Become yourself. Yes, that's actually what it is. Oh, God, the synchronicity of this podcast. Become yourself. Nietzsche and me.